All right, welcome back. This unit is all about inheritance. In our last video, we learned about instance of, and we used it in order to cast objects. And the question is, and this seems pretty complicated. Why do you want to do all this stuff? Well, we're going to pick up there, and we're going to code an equals method. Okay, if we've coded equals methods before, this shouldn't be hard. I'm going to flip over to person, because that is where I want this equals method to go. And typically I put it underneath my getters and setters above the toString. It doesn't have to go there and go anywhere. But I'm going to say public boolean equals. I'm going to take in a person. We'll call it person. Okay, let's go ahead and Java doc this thing. This returns true if this has the same state as person. This, what are we talking about? Equals is going to compare two person objects, right? The explicit parameter, which I see right here, that's person, as well as the implicit parameter. You need a person in order to call this, right? We'll see something like P1 equals P2. We've used equals methods before. We've used them a ton when it comes to string, and this is the format that they follow, right? Returns true if this, maybe I should say this person has the same state as person. False otherwise. Okay. What do we mean by state? State is all of the instance variables. In the case of person, there's only two right now, right? We're extending object. Object doesn't have any. We have the two that we define here. So that's what we're talking about. Okay. So we would say something like, oh, I can just do this at the point of return. Return first. First is a string. So I want to know, does it equal person.first? A couple of things here before I throw in the last name. When I say first here, and we don't have an implicit parameter, it is implied this dot first. I want to know, is the name of the first name of the implicit parameter equal to the first name of the explicit parameter? Okay. Now, because there's really no other first in question, we can leave this off, and it is implied this dot first. The other kind of weird thing that we're still probably getting used to, we're still wrapping our heads around, this isn't too bad, but I'm just going into the person object and pulling out the first name. That's a private instance variable. I didn't think you could do that. I have said it multiple times. What private restricts access to is the class that it's defined in. Because we are in the person class, we can access person instance variables directly without having to go through a getter. You could, right? This could be expressed as person.getFirst, and that's going to be the same thing, right? Because our getFirst getter, it's just going to return first, and that works. If you're going to go this route, I would be symmetrical with it and do that, and you can see why I kind of avoid it, because it starts getting convoluted with, so many method calls, extra parentheses, when I could just do this. So I feel like this is a lot cleaner. I'm saying, is the first name of the implicit parameter this? Is this dot first equal to person dot first? If so, my two objects in question have the same first name. Okay, well, that's part of it. That's part of my state. The other is my last name. Is last the same? Okay. Why does an equals method exist? Well, we're trying to see if two objects have the same state, not necessarily if they're literally the same object. I'm going to create some person objects here, just real fast, right? Person P1 is equal to a new person. Just going through the no args so that we get the exact same state, easy peasy. Okay, why does an equals method exist? Well, if I ask, does P1 equal P2 using an equal relational operator, what am I going to get? Are these two people the same? No. The equals relational operator is checking the pointers. It's asking, is P1 pointing at the same object that P2 is pointing at? The answer is no. Because of the new operator, these are two distinct objects, but they have the same state, which is why the equals method is important. All right, and there you see I get a true value. All right, so that's an equals method. Yeah, we've done that before. How does this tie in? Well, object API Java. We learned just a couple of videos ago that object has an equals method, right? So I am overriding that one, right? Or am I? Say what? All right, let's take one of our person objects and see what we can call. Here, there is equals that takes in a person object. Yeah, that makes sense. And a little bit further down, there is equals, which takes in an object. I am not overriding the equals method. I am overloading it. This version here, it's still there. All right. It is still there. We are overloading it. At this point, we've inherited this one out of object, and then we proceeded to write our own. What is the big deal out of this? Well, because because this version of equals takes in any object, I can pass it any object. I want to know, does P1 equal hello world? Bruh. False. Okay, that seems reasonable, right? So what's the big deal here? Yes, sure, I'm overloading it. Yes, sure, this version exists, and we could do wonky things like pass in any object, such as a string or a scanner. Scanner's an object, right? I can pass in a scanner, and I want to know, does P1 equal? Okay, we'll import. I'll do it. I'll do it for the vine. We can import scanner. I can do this equals thing. I still get a false. This is using the object version of equals, which is just checking the pointers. I don't really get any runtime errors here because we're just asking, is this object pointing at the same thing that this object is? And no. And the equals, we get a false value. So all that seems reasonable. What is the big deal here? Okay. Well, the big deal is there are certain libraries in place inside of Java that rely on an equals method. You really want to override the equals method, not overload. Notice this is gray now because I'm not even using it. We want to override this, not overload it. Why? Why? I'll show you why. I'm going to bring back an array list of person objects. People, new array list of person. Okay. And I'll leave P2. It's fine. I'm going to take people and I'm going to add a new person. That's going to go through our noargs constructor. I'm going to add a new person. Let's just do this a couple of times. And by a couple, I mean 3. Okay. Now, I want to know, does people contain P1? and I get a false value. Okay. We've seen this contains method whenever we talked about array list, and we would use strings maybe to demonstrate this, or integers. And think about this. If you create an array list of strings and you want to know, is there a string in my array list, you would get back a correct true or false value, depending on what you were looking for. We'll pound that out real fast too. Watch. Array list of string. And we're going to have, I'll call it stirs. And I'm going to create a string called S1, which is hello. And I'm going to take stirs, and I'm going to add hello to it, right? This is the same situation, but it's with strings. I've got a person array list full of no args persons. All of these people have the same state as P1 and P2. Yet when I ask, is P1 in people? I get no. I get a false value. I'm going to come in with an array list of strings. Hello is there. I have S1, which is hello. I'm going to ask, does stirs contain S1? This is effectively the same question that I asked here. What do you expect? We get a true value, okay? So what I am proving by doing this is that the contains method here cares about state. Does this thing, does S1 in terms of state appear in STRs, in stirs? Yet my contains method up here doesn't work that way. The contains method, all it's doing is using an equals method, using the equals method. The difference is this is using strings equals method, right? Because we're talking about a string array list. So it's going to use the equals method that string has in order to detect is S1 in stirs. We want ours to do the same thing. In order to do that, we need to override, not overload. This is why you would want to override the equals method. Okay. There are existing libraries such as the contains method. Sorting, I don't know if we've looked at collections.sort, which would organize the thing. I guess that one's not based on equals. Contains is the best example. All right. So what I want to do is override. In order to override, we have to have the exact same signature. What do I mean? There is an equals method coming in that is public boolean equals, and it takes in an object. This would be overriding, not this one. Okay, let's see what the slides have to say. Right. In theory, I just compare the first names and the last names, blah, 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 blah. This is why we want to cast. Okay, what's going to happen here? This can take in any object, right? I ultimately want to know, do these people have the same first name? If I try to do this, we'll call this person to make everyone happy, right? Here's my equals method. I am successfully overriding. I can put an @override tag here if it makes you happy. We are overriding the equals method that is coming out of object. It specifies an object as an explicit parameter. So in order for me to override, I need the signatures to be the exact same. Right? The name of the method is equals. It returns a Boolean. It accepts an object. Here is a new problem. We can assume, right, the first and last work because the data type of this is person. But this doesn't work here because the data type of person is object. Why is that a problem? Well, don't be confused. It's not a person. It's an object. It's obj, right? The compile time data type tells us what we can call. If I take obj and do a dot, here's all the stuff that I can do with it. It ain't much. It's those 8 or 9 methods that are coming out of object. I can't call obj.first because there isn't a first. This thing doesn't have a first or last name. In fact, this could be any object. As of right now, it could be a string that's coming in. It could be a scanner. It could be an entire array list. It could be passed in as a parameter here. So yeah, that thing doesn't have a first or last name. What I need to do is cast it. I want to change the compile time data type. Change the compile time data type. What I'm actually going to do is create a local variable called person, and I want to save in obj. Right? I want to turn the compile time data type of this thing into person. The problem here is I'm trying to save object, something that is larger, into person, something that is smaller. This is where the casting from our last video should come in. And we'll say, okay, well, we'll just cast it as a person. So an object comes in, I narrow it down, I turn it into a person, I save it into this person variable. So instead of working with obj for the rest of it, I'm working with person. So the cast allows me to change the compile time data type. Really, I'm saving it into a different box, a different variable, while I'm also able to satisfy my add override because this has the same signature as the method that we are trying to override. Okay, why is this awesome? Right? If I go back to my driver, now that we are overriding the equals method, this contains should work. True. P1 is there. Booyah. What's the problem now? You know there's another problem. This takes in any object. Still, we are overriding, which is what we want to do. We want to override so things like the contains method will work as intended. However, by doing that, I can take in any object, right? We do this cast. What's the big deal? All right, now take a look. What if I take P1 and I want to know, does it equal hello? I'll put that in an SOP. Bruh. Come on, man. Class cast exception. Blah, blah, blah. If I click it, it takes me right here to our line 55 where we're doing our cast. I called this equals method and I passed in a string. We're taking that string and we're turning it into a person. Does that work? No, that doesn't work because string is not an instance of person. Our slides said it in our last video. A cast will work as long as the object is an instance of the cast. So we can't just willy-nilly do this. Notice that I didn't previously have an issue. This is not a syntax issue. This is a runtime issue, right? I'm getting the exception at runtime because what I actually passed in was a string. Okay, so before we just do the cast without thinking, I should check to see what this thing actually is. I should check to see, will the cast be successful? So what I'm going to do is ask if obj is an instance of person. If this is true, what it means is that the cast will be successful. Right? If the object coming in, if the runtime data type, that's what we're actually checking, I can see the compile time. The compile time data type of obj is object. But at runtime, it could be anything because everything is ultimately beneath object. It could be a string, it could be a scanner, it could be an array list, it could be an array. It could be a person, it could be a student, it could be a card. It could be any object because everything is ultimately beneath object in the class hierarchy. So what I want to do is check the runtime data type. is this thing, is obj equal to or beneath person in the class hierarchy? If it is, then the cast will work, and it will not give me a class cast exception. So I'm only going to try to do the cast if I know it'll be successful. We'll cast this thing. If they got the same first and last name, then we know that they're equal. Okay. IntelliJ's mad at me right now because we're missing a return statement now. If this is false, what it means is that obj is not an instance of person. This is something else weird, a string or a scanner, etc. So I'm just going to simply return false. Of course, they're not the same, right? They're not even the same runtime data type. Let's try this. I'm going to run my program again, and we're not going to get the class cast exception. So whenever I ask, is P1 equal to hello, I get a false value. This is the point. This is the point of casting. This is the point of instance of, to check to make sure a cast can work. We're overriding the equals method successfully by matching our signatures. And we want to do that so that things like the contains method will work as intended. Okay, that is actually a good spot for us to stop on this one. I'll see you in the next one.